I want each of you to picture in your mind some place that does not have running water or electricity. So I want each of you to get into your mind some place that doesn't have running water or electricity. For some of you, maybe you grew up in a more rural environment and that was kind of what your childhood was like. Some of you went on, or possibly like rough vacations, and in your travels around the world, you've ended up in destinations that didn't have running water or electricity. And for some of you, perhaps it was just in a magazine that you saw throughout life. For me, it happened to be this house right here. I grew up in the same town that Abraham Lincoln grew up in, who was the 16th president of the United States. Now, mind you, there was about 150 years difference in our growing up. But as a summertime, we used to go out there and we used to go to Abraham Lincoln's house. And we used to imagine what it was like to be a boy growing up in the early 1800s and to experience life without running water, electricity, to experience life without the elements we have today. Now, while you have that image in your head of not having running water and electricity, I want you to hear these words. Are you ready? In the next 5 years, every one of you is going to have running water and electricity. So you don't have it at all now, and you hear the words, in the next 5 years, every one of you is going to have running water and electricity. And most of you in the room, you're nodding your head going, yeah, that sounds good. It's a good idea. That would be great if that would happen. But I want to be honest with you, we wouldn't react that way. If I don't have running water and electricity, and I would be sitting around and somebody comes in and tells me, you're going to have running water and electricity in the next 5 years, I would actually start asking, what's wrong with the kerosene lamps? What's wrong with the way that it is now? What's wrong with Hassan that brings me water by camel every day? Why do we have to change? Why does it need to be any different than the way it is now? So we wouldn't actually be quite as excited about getting the running water and electricity if we didn't have it as we think we would. Actually, probably 2/3 of you would fight the idea. We would fight the change. Although it's a great progression, it's something much better, we would fight it. But I also want you to hear these words. So you're still in this house, no running water, no electricity. In the next 5 years, everyone is going to have running water and electricity. And by the way, we're also going to dredge the creek. The creek, the port right now, it's getting built up with sand and silt. And because it's getting built up, the ships can't come in, or the boats would be a better term than the ships. The boats can't come in. And if the boats can't come in, that means that all of our supplies and our food's not going to get to us. And if we don't have any food, we're going to starve. Now, on that one, we'd say, that's a great idea. Let's dredge the creek so the boats can come in because I don't want to starve. Now, mind you, though, here we are. In the next 5 years, you're going to have running water and electricity. At the same time of that, somebody tells you, we're going to dredge the creek so the boats can come in, and we're going to build a bridge. Sorry? We're going to build a bridge. In your mind, most of us will be going, what's a bridge? We don't even have paved roads. Why are you talking about building a bridge? And really, what does a bridge do anyhow? What's going on? And by the way, not only are we going to build a bridge, we're going to build an airport. A what? We're going to build an airport. Why do we need an airport? We don't even have a bridge. Nor do we have paved roads. We don't even have running water and electricity. And you want to build an airport? And because we're going to build an airport, we're going to build a hotel. And we're going to build a car park for everybody to be able to park their car. We're going to build a car park for 500 cars. I'm sorry. Remember, we don't have paved roads. We don't have but 45 or 50 cars. Why are you building a car park for 500 cars? That was 1959 in Dubai. In Sheikh Rashid's first year of ruling Dubai, he took over late 1958. Following the mourning period of his father's death, he really started his rule, the beginning of 59. And he turned to everybody and said, in the next 5 years, you're going to have running water and electricity. We're going to dredge the creek so the boats can get in. We're going to build a bridge. And I can promise you, people were like, what's a bridge? We have no idea what this bridge concept is across the creek. We're going to build an airport. We're going to build a hotel. And we're going to build a car park for 500 cars. Oh, and by the way, we don't have any money. So he announces in his first year of rule, 6, what would be classified at that time period, mega projects with absolutely no money at all. And when I look at this and when I think about it, it really begins to paint the picture of the purity. Dubai is the purest story that I know of growing against the odds. Dubai didn't get any oil for another 10 years, till 1969, and frankly, when it got it, it didn't get very much. It is the absolute pure picture of growing against the odds. And what we're going to do today is we're going to answer that question. Now, I was kind of... probably obsessed would be the right word. I wanted to understand how Dubai happened. I've studied leadership my whole life. I've studied it from a Western perspective, and I've studied it from an emerging market perspective. And you don't find a lot of stories that in 1959, which is almost my lifetime, I'm a little bit younger than that, had no running water and electricity. And when you, look where you are today on a man-made island in the replica of the Atlantis Hotel, and you look at the contrast there, and it made me want to understand what happened. So I spent 3 years diving in and doing extremely deep research, 20,000 pages, to be able to come up with the answer. And there were actually 12 habits that are sitting behind how Dubai grew against the odds. For those of you that don't know Dubai extremely well, I want to fill in a tiny bit of the picture. When I use the phrase growing against the odds, Dubai is the constant picture of that. In my estimation, it has never had the wind to its sails. It has never had life kind of just rolling out. It has had to make its way in a world and fighting in a very tough neighborhood with poor economic conditions against it, with multiple regional wars going on, and Dubai has had to work through every aspect of this. So here's the 12 habits in regard to that, but we don't have a lot of time together today. So what I want to do is spend a few minutes and concentrate on a couple of these habits and to help you, because let's be frank, 2016, some people would say, is a year where we all need to know how to grow against the odds. It's not the year to where everything is looking fantastic. Whether we look at low oil prices, whether we look at currency fluctuations that are going on, whether we look at regional hostilities for the Middle East, and if we're getting into Africa, we're getting into deep currency issues, it's a tough year. And what I want to do is motivate you, inspire you with a few stories out of Dubai and a few other aspects to talk about what do we need to do to grow against the odds. The first one is we need to have an ambitious appetite. 2001, September 2001, we all know what happened on 9/11 that day. And the following 2 months after that, there were over 300,000 jobs that were taken out of the airline industry. 30 different airline companies went bankrupt. For an industry, it was probably that industry's lowest point ever, were the couple of months following September 2001. I can't think of any other period that would have had the same worldwide negative impact. So here we are, and we're in an industry that some people are questioning the survivability of it. People are questioning, will people really travel again? Will they move, or will they fly again? And all of a sudden, in November of that year, Emirates Airline makes the world's record aircraft order. So here they are in an industry that most people are saying it is the wrong time, it is falling apart, global financial issues are beginning to play out. People are not flying on aircraft, they're closing, they're laying people off, and Emirates Airline announces the world's record, not the Emirates Airline record, the world's record order. Now, if you picked up the following day, if you would have picked up Financial Times or any of the other newspapers, here are the words you would have read. Who do they think they are? Do they think they have more money than God? Do they not know that the airline industry is over? It's never going to recover again. Why are they wasting all of this money? This is exactly what was written in the newspaper the day after they made that order. Everybody was questioning, what in the world are they doing? This is a horrible time. But Emirates Airline had an ambition, and they were looking to the future, and they were thinking about something different, and they wanted to do something fantastic. And they made the order. Now, I've had the privilege of sitting down and talking with Sheikh Ahmed about that, and he laughs, and he's kind of like, when I read the paper and I hear what everybody was saying then, I didn't understand their point of view. He said, did they legitimately, really think that no one would ever fly again? Did they really think that no one was going to get on an airplane? How could people be so foolish to think that the industry would not recover? But most people were operating and acting as if it was not going to recover. Just as if most people are operating and acting as though 2016 is a year to not have ambition. It's a year not to grow. It's a year not to take market share. Whereas you're sitting in a room that's saying, let's take market share, let's grow as much as we can, and we can move on. And then he goes, the real kicker for me, do people not know that you don't pay for aircraft when you order it? You pay for aircraft when you take delivery. So it's not like we had to pay for them now and to wait 10 years. 10 years later, exactly 10 years later, 2011, Emirates Airline had its record profit. It made more money in 2011 than it had any other year, and by far more money. The same journalist, the same exact journalist in 2001 who wrote, who do they think they are? Do they think they have more money than God? Do they not know that this industry will ever recover? And basically said it was the worst move that they could have made. The same exact journalist writes, the day after Emirates announces its record profit, writes, it was an absolute stroke of genius what they did 10 years ago when they bought the aircraft at the low point of the market, and they had the courage and the ambition to do what nobody else was willing to do. And they managed to buy out the whole supply chain. The same journalist is saying, when you were awful here, it was a stroke of genius here. And what we begin to see is we begin to see this idea of what we need to have is we need to have an ambitious appetite. Now, ambition is not an easy word. When I wrote this book, it was the single word I struggled most with. This particular book I wrote sitting in a brown leather chair, stuck in the corner of the study in the house. And when I write a book, I tend to disappear for about a month. And I sit down and I block the entire universe away, and I play the same soundtrack over and over. It's like on repeat. And it plays the same music, and they continue to bring me a glass of water and coffee, and I kind of live on that, and my head's down, and I'm writing. And so I'm tucked away in this brown leather chair and just writing away and listening to the music and drinking coffee and water over and over and over. And every time the word ambitious came up, I thought, it's wrong. It's the wrong word. If I were to ask any of you in the room, if I said, who of you in here is ambitious? Most every hand would go up. If I said, are you ambitious? You would begin to raise your hand. I'm ambitious. I am. But let me ask you, when you don't have running water and electricity, would you say in the next 5 years everybody's going to have running water and electricity? Would you say we're going to dredge a creek? Would you say let's build a bridge? Would you say let's build an airport when we don't have running water and electricity? Would you say let's build a hotel to go with it and a car park when we have no money and no running water and electricity? Most of us would probably have to answer, no, we wouldn't actually say that. How many of us would make the world's record order of aircraft when the industry is absolutely falling apart? We would say, no, we wouldn't do that. So when I look at ambition, I think of ambition like you do. I think of it as my small dreams. But when we talk about leading against the odds, your small dreams, your delivering your budget in 2016 is not ambitious. Okay? I can promise you that if you're sitting here today and going, we're stretching our growth by about 5%, that's not the ambition that we're talking about here. We're talking about an ambition that is an absolute hunger, a hunger for something else. What do you see when you look at this picture? What do you see? The first thing that's going to come to a lot of your minds is a bookstore. And then you're going to begin to look thinking I'm asking you a trick question. So you're going to try to look a lot deeper. And you're going to go, well, I see some trees. I see two different fonts that are up there. I see, and you're going to think I'm kind of lead you to something, but you were right. It's a bookstore. Okay, when you look at the picture, you see a bookstore. Is that fair? Everybody sees a bookstore? Okay. A guy named Jeff Bezos walked out of his office in 1994. He was a senior vice president of a company called J.D. Shaw. It was an investment firm on Wall Street. And he walks out of his office at lunchtime one day, and he's going to grab a sandwich. And he happens to be walking down the street, and he looks over and he sees a bookstore, this bookstore. And he thinks to himself, I wonder how many titles, how many books this bookstore holds. As only an analyst would begin to ask this type of question. And he looks at it and he thinks, I wonder how many titles this could have. And he says he paused and he looked at it and he began to calculate the square feet or the square meters of the store and began to think about how much of the floor space would be covered with bookshelves and about how many linear feet of books are on a bookshelf, and begins to calculate. And he says this bookstore probably holds 175,000 titles. And he continues to walk on. He gets to the place where he's grabbing a sandwich, and he sits down, and he's eating his lunch, and he's eating the sandwich, and he's kind of bugged by this, and he thinks, wouldn't it be really cool if there was a bookstore that was big enough to house every title in the world? So if you could walk in a bookstore and get any book in the world you could get. And then he begins to do the calculation, and he does the calculation off of 1 million titles. Now, to put this in perspective, there's about 1 million new titles every year. Okay? So he does this calculation off of 1 million books, and he begins to think, but it's not economically feasible to do this. The size of the bookstore you would have to have compared to the rental cost or the acquisition cost of the bookstore and the materials and the ability to sell every title, it's not possible. It's economically not possible to do. Now, to put this in perspective, you would have to actually add what he said it would be every year, because there's 1 million new titles. So if he did his calculation on 1 million new titles and says it's not possible, next year you have to actually add all that again. So he goes back to work a little bit with almost depressed. And he's thinking about it would be fantastic to have this bookstore. Sits back down, and a statistic comes across his desk. This thing called the World Wide Web is growing at 2,300% year on year. Not the internet. We're not even at the evolution of the internet yet. It's still called the World Wide Web, for those of you in the room that are old enough to remember this. It's growing at 2,300% year on year. So he turns to his boss. He's like, boss, we need to do something with this World Wide Web. It's growing at 2,300%. And his boss goes, what's the World Wide Web? And Jeff, in his limited understanding, tries to explain it. But then he turns back to his boss. He says, but honestly, boss, the World Wide Web is not the significant part of this issue. The 2,300% is the significant issue. Anything growing at 2,300% year on year, we should be a part of. That's remarkable. It doesn't matter what it is. That statistic right there should beg you to be a part of it. And his boss says, Jeff, go back to work. So he turns to his coworkers, to his peers, and tries to tell them about it. And he says, guys, there's this thing called the World Wide Web. It's growing at 2,300% year on year. We should invest in it. We should do something with it. And they ask basically the same questions. What's the World Wide Web? And Jeff says, that's not the issue. We should be doing something with it. It's 2,300% year on year. And guess what his coworkers tell him? Jeff, go back to work. So of an evening, he goes to his friends and starts telling his friends, there's this thing I came across today called the World Wide Web, growing at 2,300% year on year. It's fantastic. We should do something with it. And his friends say, Jeff, go back to work. He can't. He's caught up in it. So he makes a list of 26 different items, things that you could do with this World Wide Web. And he lists 26 elements out. Number one on the list is music. And he thinks to himself, though, yeah, but music, you can't really do it. There's only 6 players. It's too condensed of an industry. It'd be too hard to break into it. He scratches it off. And then he works his way down. Number 6 on his list is, guess what? Books. So he works his way down his list, gets to number 6 and says, books. That's it. That bookstore that houses every title in the world, we could do that on the World Wide Web. So he goes back to his boss and says to his boss, "Boss, I've got it. We should do a bookstore on this thing called the World Wide Web. We should do this. It's growing 23%. A bookstore would be perfect." And what's his boss tell him? "Jeff, go back to work." So he turns to his friends and says, "Friends, goes to his coworkers, this is incredible. It's growing 2,300%. Help me convince the boss this is what we should be doing." And they looked at him and they said, "Jeff, go back to work." He turns to his friends, and with his friends he says, "Guys, this is incredible. We should start a business. Let's put our money together, and we should start this bookstore for all the titles in the world on the World Wide Web." I said, "Jeff, you're a senior vice president on Wall Street. You've got a great job. Why are you even thinking about this? Go back to work." But his wife, "Yeah, Habibi, I support you, mia b'mia. I support you 100%. Whatever you want to do, I'm with you." He says later, he goes, "I don't think she really meant what she said." So he went back to work the next day and resigned. Comes home. They jump in the car. They drive to Austin, Texas, to where his parents live. Now, mind you, they have no money. They have very, very, very little money. They hadn't saved much. No bank would give him money. Friends wouldn't give him money. The investment firm he worked for had no interest in it. He goes to his parents. He says, "Mom and Dad, I need your life savings." Not part of your life savings. "I need your life savings." All $300,000 of it. For what? There's this thing called the World Wide Web growing at 2,300% year on year, and I want to create a bookstore on it. Jeff goes, I'm absolutely sure my dad had no idea what the World Wide Web was. And he turned and he says to me, "Jeff, what are our chances of success?" And Jeff goes, "I give you a 70% chance of failure. Can I have your money?" And Jeff goes, I thought to myself, that's actually 3 times better than average. Okay, most people, there's only a 10% chance of success. I'm giving them 30%. That's actually really good in my mind where I come from. They give him the check for $300,000. They jump in the car from Austin, Texas, and begin to drive across the U.S. to Seattle, Washington. They write the business plan in the car on the way there, and 2 weeks later open Amazon.com. That is an ambitious appetite. That is the hunger of need. That is what we in this room need to be thinking about if we really want to make the impact and to have the businesses we can have. We need to be thinking in the same way that Sheikh Ahmed thought when he made the aircraft order. We need to be thinking in the same way that Jeff Bezos was thinking when he started Amazon. And in addition to that, though, we need to realize that we're leading today for tomorrow. If we are limiting our perspective and thinking about just today, we're going to have a big problem. When Sheikh Ahmed made that aircraft order, he was thinking about Emirates in the future, not Emirates in 2001. Jeff Bezos was thinking about something much larger than where anybody's mind could have been at the time. Now, if you were running at 30% capacity, so let's say you're running this hotel at 30, and your current occupancy is 30% capacity of your capacity, what would you do? So basically, 30% of the rooms are full, 70% are not full. What would you do? Most of us, somebody's going to say we would invest in marketing. Somebody's going to say we would redo our strategy. Somebody's going to say we would focus on sales. And then the majority of the room is going to say we would start cutting costs. We would lay people off, cut costs, close parts of the hotel. We would reduce the electricity bill, and we would begin to shrink the availability of the hotel back down to something close to our 30%. In the early 1970s, there was a port in Dubai called Mina Rashid. Mina Rashid was running 30% capacity. Okay, so there was 2/3 capacity available that wasn't being utilized. So as it's running 30% capacity, the solution for this coming from Sheikh Rashid was, let's triple our capacity. So while my port is running at 30% capacity, we're using 1/3 of our available capacity. He says, I've got an idea, guys. Let's triple our available capacity. And some of you have the look that I think the people in town had. Huh? Several of your mouths dropped, your jaws are open, you're like, I'm going to use a word I don't mean any disrespect by. We're thinking, is he a lunatic? Has he lost his mind? Is he going crazy? We're running 30% capacity and we're going to triple it. But that's not all. He also says, and let's go build a port at Jebel Ali, which is just up the road from here, and let's make the biggest port in the Middle East. So while my current port is at 30% capacity, I'm going to triple this, and I'm going to go build the biggest one in the Middle East. Okay, this is an ambitious appetite, but this is also what I'm going to come to play leading today for tomorrow. The people in Dubai didn't really understand this. And I don't mean the handful of expats, because it really was a handful of expats at that particular time. The people in Dubai were like, the Dubaians, the Emiratis were thinking, he's going to lose all of our money. Because this is the early 70s. Dubai has about 4 or 5 years of oil wealth now. There's a little bit of money, and he's going to go waste all of this money. This is crazy. So they turned to Sheikh Mohammed, who would have been in his 20s at the time, and they said, please, can you go talk to your father? This is risky. What he's doing is a huge amount of risk right now in regards to tripling this port and building that thing out in the middle of nowhere. Because Jebel Ali then was like days kind of trip mentality-wise. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere. So Sheikh Mohammed says, fine, I'll go talk to my father. Goes out to Jebel Ali and finds his dad one day, and he walks up to him. His dad's looking at the progress that's going on as they're beginning to dig this port out of the desert sand. And Sheikh Mohammed walks up to him and says, Dad, I need to ask you a question. He says, the townspeople, the leaders in town, they don't really understand what you're doing. And I need to be able to tell them and explain what's going on now. They're worried that you're going to lose all of the money that we have now. Sheikh Mohammed says his dad was smoking one of the long, thin pipes at that point, and he takes the pipe out of his mouth and puts it down and looks at the ground, and they said he kind of like played in the sand for a moment. Looked back up, put the pipe back in his mouth. Sheikh Mohammed says, when my dad doesn't answer your question, you don't ask twice. So he goes, he's standing there and he's like, what's going on? What am I going to tell everybody? What's going to happen? What's going on here? After a few minutes, Sheikh Rashid turns to Sheikh Mohammed and he says, please, son, he said, ride back to Dubai with me. Jump in my truck. They get in the truck and they're making the way back, and he says, for the first few minutes, it's very quiet. And then all of a sudden, Sheikh Rashid turns to him and says, son, you asked me a question back there that I didn't answer. I want to answer now. You and the townspeople don't understand what I'm doing. You see, I'm doing something for you today that you'll never be able to do tomorrow. And Sheikh Mohammed said that phrase really grabbed his attention, because Sheikh Rashid understood that as a leader who can grow against the odds, you make decisions that may not make sense today for the future of where you are. This room happens to have the countries that I spend the majority of my time in, okay? I rarely ever get to Europe. I don't spend maybe 4 or 5 days a year in the U.S. only on work. I spend my time in the Middle East, Africa, Central Asia is where I spend the majority of my time. So your economic conditions and your demographics and what's going on, I actually would say that I have a really strong working knowledge of. And you are the people in the world that can make decisions for tomorrow's payout. It is the markets that have future payout left in it. The U.S. and Europe doesn't have much future payout left in it. You have the differential. We need to be like Sheikh Rashid, who's looking into the future and thinking about where we're going to go. Now, as I get into this, it's interesting that it had a huge impact on Sheikh Mohammed. Sheikh Mohammed regularly says now, he says, I don't know if I'm a good leader or not, but I can tell you this, I'm leading 20 to 30 years into the future. He's making decisions today that are generational rather than quarterly. And as leaders, if we want to grow against the odds, we need to be giving the market what the market deserves rather than what our quarterly results can do for it. And we need to be thinking with ambition and for the future. The next piece I want to get into is, frankly, my favorite aspect of leadership. I've studied leadership for, how old am I? 25 years roughly I've studied leadership. It's all I've done in my adult life. I tell people, if you want to talk leadership, I'm a lot of fun. Any other topic, I'm rather boring. I know one thing, I've given my life totally to this topic. And what we're going to look at now is creating an environment for others to succeed, because that really is the essence. That's the crux. That's what leadership is really about, helping others to succeed. Now, in 1901, the ruler of Dubai was a guy named Maktoum bin Hashir. Dubai had somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 residents at that time. Based upon my study, I would say it was probably closer to the 4,000 numbers, on the lower end of this. Now, in 1901, there was a nationalist government takeover in modern-day Iran or Persia, and they were putting a lot of pressure on the Arabs. They were actually increasing the taxes and adding fees to the Arab traders and basically trying to take some of the success they had away from them. So as this was going on in 1901, the news had traveled over to Dubai. Now, mind you, Dubai had 4,000 people. I think more people live in my compound than that. Okay, like when I look at where I live, I think there's more people living in that area, that part of Dubai, than there actually was all of Dubai then. So the news had come back to Sheikh Maktoum bin Hashir about this pressure going on. Now, the Arab traders that were living in Persia, in modern-day Iran, they were actually from a tribe that belonged to Sharjah, which had the big port, and the Ras Al Khaimah, who had the perfectly located port. So logic would say that they would go home. Fair? So if pressure's coming on them and it's not good where you're living as an expat per se, the logic says you'll go home. Sheikh Maktoum bin Hashir turns to the guys that he's with in the Majlis and he says, I want you to go over there and tell them to come to Dubai. Now, when I write and try to get into this, I try to really understand what's going on, okay? Now, when I first heard that story told to me, I thought, yeah, sure, they jumped in a boat and they headed right over there and they did it. And then I thought, but that's not very normal, okay? Because we don't usually follow the leader that quickly. Is that fair? When our leader says to go do something, especially something that seems a little crazy, we give some feedback. Something that seems ridiculously crazy, we would give a lot of feedback. Fair? So as he's saying, I want you to go over there and tell them to come to Dubai, I'm sure that the conversation started to go in regards to, what are we going to say to them? They're from Sharjah and Ras Al Khaimah. They're going to go back there. What are we going to say? What are we going to do? And the strategy comes to play out. So the guys get into the boat. They head over to there. They go to what's called Linga, 178 kilometers away. And they get out of the boat and they turn to the Arab traders and they say, we want you to come to Dubai. I'm sure their reaction was, what's Dubai? Not where is Dubai, what is a Dubai? Like having no idea what this thing called Dubai is. And then they begin to explain it's a small fishing village of a couple thousand people and it's close to Sharjah where you're from. We want you to come there. And I can imagine their reaction would be, why? Why would I go to this Dubai thing? Why would I do it? And they said to him, because we're going to give you free land and no taxes. 84 years before the idea of a free zone started, they turned and said, we're going to give you free land and no taxes. Now, as you begin to dive into this and look at it, what comes to play is Sheikh Maktoum bin Hashir understood if he created an environment where others succeed, his success is a byproduct. His success just happens if you succeed. And over time, they started to come. In the next decade, the next 10 years, all of the big business was coming into Dubai, no longer going to Sharjah and to Ras Al Khaimah. The strategy played out because what they had done is they had created an environment for where others could succeed. You're probably asking, though, why is McDonald's up there? Okay, why are you telling us a story about 1901, which is well before the beginning of McDonald's, and why do you have a picture of McDonald's? One of our kids was the first intern ever to work at McDonald's in the UAE this past summer, and I have this fantasy, it's probably fantasy is the right word, that I'm going to teach my kids how to be leaders and how to raise them to be really good. So we had him do an internship at McDonald's. He was the first one ever, so we had to get the undersecretary of the Ministry of Labor to sign off because he was under the age of 18, and I wanted him to do an internship in the store, not in the office. So 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, he's in his uniform, making burgers, fries, breakfast, really working. Loved it. Into the summer comes, and I'm like, okay, you need to say thank you to McDonald's for what you did. And he's like, what? What do you mean? I said, you're going to, which meant we're going to, okay, host a dinner for the president of McDonald's for the Middle East and Africa, and also for the owner of the franchise. So he's like, okay. So we get him on the dates, we get everybody arrived, and everybody comes to the house. And we had our son say thank you very much and give this little speech. And then we sat down and we're eating dinner. And as we're eating dinner, I'm sitting here, and a guy named Rafeef Fahy is sitting there. And we got talking about this point, create an environment where others succeed. And Rafeef tells me in the midst of that conversation, he says, did you know McDonald's has never had a contract? And I leaned over, I said, you don't have a contract with McDonald's? I'm thinking he's telling me his franchise, which is 137 stores now, 135 at the time, have never had a contract with McDonald's. And he says, no, McDonald's doesn't have contracts. I'm like, what? Probably a lot of you confused. McDonald's has to have contracts. It's impossible not to have a contract. It's got to be a contractual relationship after all. And I'm kind of bugged. So I push him a little bit, and he's like, no, we don't. I'm like, so I'm asking questions. The guys that give you burgers and this, that, and the other. And he's like, no. I think he's lost his mind. Frankly, I didn't believe him. So I thought, how am I going to ask Yusuf, who's the president of McDonald's for the Middle East and Africa, the one that really works for McDonald's, not the franchise owner, how am I going to ask this without putting Rafeef down? So I turned to Yusuf, like, Yusuf, that's incredible. You guys don't have contracts. He's like, yeah. And his response was so accepting and normal that I was like, oh my gosh, I think this is true. I said, hold on, you've got to explain this to me. I said, I don't understand. McDonald's represents 5% of Coca-Cola's revenue. 5% of Coke's global revenue comes from McDonald's. I said, you mean to tell me the shareholders of Coca-Cola have not forced you to have a contract with them? I'm like, and Pepsi would probably do anything to get the Coke business, to get the McDonald's beverage business, anything for that in the world. He says, no, we've never had a contract. I said, well, how does this work? So it's a very simple principle, very, very simple principle. And I want you to hear this clearly because it's a very simple principle for this room in here. He said, we cannot do business without Coke, the guy that gives us our Idaho potatoes, without the buns, the burgers, and all of that. We can't do business without them. If that's not in our store, we have nothing to sell. And they all know that they're much bigger because they have us as a client. So the guy that sells, we are 5% of Coke's revenue after all. That's a big margin. That's a big account for Coca-Cola. The guy that sells Idaho potatoes is much bigger as a result of McDonald's in that equation. He said, here's how it works. Every 2 years, we negotiate pricing terms. We give guidance of what we think the forecast will be to our supply chain. If we're wrong and the number's lower, we will take the loss at McDonald's before we push it into our supply chain. You will make a profit, but you will make a reduced profit if our estimate is lower. If the estimate is the other way and it's positive, you agree to share some of the profit back with us. It's on a 2-year pricing model of everybody thinking about and working together of how can we create an environment for each other's success. I have to tell you, though, I left that dinner that night still a skeptic. I didn't believe him. It's too good to be true. Is that fair? So I went and I began to look this up and did validate that it's true. McDonald's doesn't have contracts. But I learned something else as well. McDonald's has produced more millionaires than any other company in the world. Not billionaires. Billionaires would be Silicon Valley, okay? It's a different equation. But McDonald's has produced more millionaires than anybody else in the world. People who've worked at McDonald's and done business with McDonald's have succeeded because McDonald's created that environment for others' success. Now, we do something called a success session regularly with a lot of the companies we work with. And what we do is we have a map out. We put who they are in the middle. And then we map everything out. So the agent distributors, their supply chain, government regulators, okay, customs offices, customers, employees, peers. We map all of it out. And then we say you need to answer a simple question. How are they better off because of you than without you? Now, if I give you the same thing, if McDonald's is giving you the same thing that Hardee's and Burger King and everybody else is, you're not better off with me. You're the same as with me. The question is, how are they better off from working with you? Because when I shift my mentality, that's when the whole thing changes. When I begin to think, I am here to help your success, and everybody's thinking the same thing, we're here to help each other's success, we all succeed a lot more. Because typically when we get to a negotiation, I think about how I can get an extra 5 dirham from you, and you think about how you can get an extra 5 dirham from me, rather than both of us thinking about how can we collectively help each other get the extra 5 dirham by growing a market, by doing something even better. So rather than saying, can I get real personal? Okay, I may be leaving very fast. So rather than sitting down, because I know that we have agent distributors in the room and I know that we have LG in the room, rather than having a negotiation on my margin and saying, help me get a little bit more money, and I'm trying to effectively screw you to get a little bit more, and you're trying to screw me to get a little bit more, rather than having that discussion, if we were to take Coke's approach, what we would both be doing is saying, wait a minute, I know you want 5 extra dirham. I want 5 extra dirham. Let's work together to figure out how we can get 10. And to shift the focus from competing with each other in the name of a partnership, okay, to literally saying, how do we create this environment to where we're really working, to where we're getting the maximum amount we can? That is a fundamental shift that goes on. Now, I want to bring this together. We've got just a few minutes left together, and I want to highlight 2 other habits. And the 2 habits I want to look at, one of them is keep the focus. Where you look, they'll look. I'm asked regularly a question after we have a conversation or a chat on Leadership Dubai Style. I'm asked, yes, but if I have ambition and my other people don't, what do I do? How do I handle this? How do I build that ambition? One of the guys that I interviewed for the book is a world endurance equestrian racer. So he's won the world championship for the equestrian endurance race. Now, to put that in perspective, it's the horsing world's equivalent of a marathon. So in a marathon, you run 42 kilometers as an individual. It takes you 3-4 hours typically. Unless you're a champion, then it's 2 hours. This is a 160-kilometer race. It takes 9 to 10 hours. So I want you to think about this. You're sitting on the back of a horse for 9 to 10 hours. I can't imagine sitting in that chair for 9 to 10 hours. Okay? So here you are, you're on the back of the horse. So I was curious, what have you learned from your hobby, because he has a day job as well, about leadership? And he says 3 things. Number 1, he said, you need to know your horse's breaking point. He said, because you need to push your horse up to its breaking point, but not over it. If you push it too hard, the horse will break. If you don't push it hard enough, it'll get slow and lazy. You need to know its breaking point. The same thing with employees. You need to know their breaking point. You push them too hard, you'll break them. If you don't push them hard enough, they'll get slow and lazy. I thought, okay, interesting point. Number 2, take care of your horse before you take care of yourself. I thought, okay. He says, just as in a marathon, every 5 kilometers, there's a water station. And a runner will typically grab the water, they take a sip of the water, and then they pour the rest of the bottle down their back, and they throw the water on the ground and make it havoc for the runners behind them. Then go on. In an endurance race, there's water stations as well. When you come to the water station, he says, you give the water to the horse first, and if there's any left over, then you take it. So you grab the water, give it to the horse, take care of the horse, make sure the horse is cool, thirst is quenched, and everything's good with the horse. Number 3, this is the piece I want you to get, because this is the one that relates to growing against the odds. Where you look, the horse will go. He said, follow me. You're on the back of a horse for 9 to 10 hours. There's points in that journey to where it's easy to get distracted. Very easy to get distracted. You're riding along and you see some nice trees or flowers or landscape, and you look at it. So, but the problem is when you turn your head, your shoulders turn. When your shoulders turn, your hips turn. When your hips turn, the horse turns. So it could just be 2 to 3 seconds, not long at all, seemingly very innocent. That's quite nice. He said, but 2 to 3 seconds can be the difference between being in first place and second place at the finish. A great jockey stays focused on where they're going constantly. A great leader needs to stay focused on where they're going, because if you don't, there's no chance that your people will. So when they start talking about low oil prices and you get into that conversation, guess what everybody's thinking about? Low oil prices. They're not thinking about the ambition anymore. They're not thinking about where you're going. You're engaging them into the side, into that area. So what you have to do is you have to keep focused on where you're going so that everybody can succeed. And the next one is probably, it's one of my favorites, is micro-monitor without micromanaging. As I was doing the research for the book, I remember I'm going to tell you the story that was the most recurring story I heard from a leadership perspective in Dubai. And I remember sitting down with a gentleman named His Excellency Tariq Luta, and I was getting ready to ask him, in your opinion, and from your experience, what is it from a leadership point of view that has created success here? And Tariq stops me and says, please, can I tell you a story? I'm like, sure, I'd be happy to. He says, in the 1960s, every morning after Fajr prayers, the prayers in the morning, and before breakfast, Sheikh Rashid used to go drive around Dubai to see the status of the projects, to see what's going on. So one morning he's driving through Dubai and he sees a building that's stalled out around the first floor when he thinks it should be up to around the 3rd floor. So he makes a mental note in his head. He's going to follow up with the owner of the building later in the day. Now, this is in the 60s. We don't have cell phones yet. We don't have anything sophisticated. So he thinks, later in the day, I'll follow up. Now, every morning at that time, they had what was called a Diwan, which was like an evening majlis, but it was for government affairs. So people would come together and they would discuss government affairs then. So that morning, Sheikh Rashid goes home, has his breakfast, gets cleaned up, goes to the Diwan, and he's sitting down, and the owner of the building happens to walk into the Diwan. Now, this particular owner wouldn't normally be there. He's not somebody who would come in the morning, he would come at night. So when he walks into the room, Sheikh Rashid says, please, 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 come sit beside me, and tells the guy who's sitting here, move, and lets the owner of the building sit. Now, if you've ever been to a majlis, the seat to the right hand of the host is the seat of honor. Now, this guy is not normally there in the morning, and he would never get the seat of honor. So he's sitting there. So everybody in the majlis is curious, what's going on? Now, most of us would turn to him immediately, and we would say, What's wrong with your building? Why'd you fall apart? Why is it falling behind schedule? We would actually, if you think about the previous point, keep the focus. We're actually distracting the focus because my goal isn't why is it behind. My goal is get it done. But we would usually say, what's wrong? Why are you falling behind? Rather than the optimum question would have been at that point, tell me what we need to do to get back on track. We need to shift our focus. What do I want to accomplish versus that? Sheikh Rashid doesn't do either. Morning, how are you? How's your family? How's everything going? They say it went 2-3 minutes. And then finally the guy gets to business. He says, my business is doing well. Sheikh Rashid, again, we would probably jump. How can you say your business is well? Ah, really? Tell me about it. So he talks about his business activities, and then the building comes up. He says, how's your building coming? Your Highness, it's doing fantastic. It's up to the 3rd floor. Now, Sheikh Rashid saw in the morning it's at the 1st floor. We would kill him, wouldn't we? Now we would bring out the fillet knife and we would slice the guy up. Lying to the ruler? The owner looks at him and says, well, Your Highness, Sheikh Rashid actually responds back. He says, the 3rd floor. He says, wow, you must have the best contractor in the universe. Well, Your Highness, thank you very much, but why do you say that? Because this morning when I drove by, it was only on the 1st floor. Now, being like a very typical, I don't want to say leader because I'm going to undermine the term, but a very typical person who's over a project that fell behind and it's just been found out, his response is normal. And he says, but Your Highness, my construction manager, that's what he's been telling me. Blame somebody else, right? When you get found out you're doing wrong, we blame else. So he's sitting there blaming others. Sheikh Rashid leans forward, takes his hand and quiets the already quiet room. It says, guys, don't believe what you hear with your ears. Go see it with your eyes. Your job is to make sure that everybody succeeds and we get everything delivered on time. And the message for us, I could spend another hour or more telling stories about micro-monitoring and the value of it. But I turned to Tarek after that and I said, I have to ask you a question. Would Dubai be what Dubai is today if it wasn't for that kind of micro-monitoring? And he says, not a chance. And I've heard stories all the way up to about 2 years ago. And the interesting thing is every time somebody's told me a story about micro-monitoring, and these would be people that were directly involved, directly monitored, every time they told me a story, they were actually thrilled that the boss took that much care and effort to make sure they were going to succeed and get on the right path. In closing, I want to bring all this back together with you and tell one final story. When Majid Al Futtaim was building Mall of the Emirates, this would have been in the late 90s, early 2000s when the project was announced and the construction was going on, nobody really understood what he was doing. At that particular time, Mall of the Emirates was way outside of what would have been populated Dubai. It was in the middle of the desert, the middle of nowhere, and he was building the Middle East's largest shopping mall. And the people around town, and I don't mean the expats, literally his neighbors were saying, I'll give you the English version of it, we feel sorry for the old man. He's going to lose all of his money. And he should be in, effectively the Arabic phrase they use would be, he should be in an insane asylum. Like he's gone crazy, he's lost his mind. I wanted to understand this. So about 2 summers ago, I was at his majlis during Ramadan. And we were getting ready to eat. There were about 60 people in the room. It was Majid Al Futtaim was there, Iyad Mullis, the CEO of his companies was there, myself. The ambassador from Singapore was beside me, and everybody else was Emirati. So we're sitting down, and I want to ask Mr. Majid, how did he stay focused and keep everybody focused during this? But I want it to be kind of a private conversation. Now, I forget when, and in that kind of environment, if I ask a question, it tends to get everybody's attention. So I lean over, and I'm like, Mr. Majid, may I ask you a question? Faddal, please, go ahead. And at that point, everybody drops their knife and fork and listens in. And I think to myself, maybe I should change my question because I'm not asking the easiest, nicest question in the world. I'll go for it anyway. So, Mr. Majid, when you were building Suqan Makheel, which is what Mall of the Emirates was originally named, I said there were a lot of people that didn't understand what was going on. They were questioning the sanity of the project. They were actually questioning his sanity, but I wasn't going to say that. I said they were questioning the sanity of the project and why would you be building this in the middle of nowhere? I said, please, I want to know two things. Number one, how did you stay focused? And number two, how did you keep everybody focused during that with all of the questions? And I'm thinking to myself, it's actually you guys at the table, the other 50-some people at the table, that were asking these questions. So I'm asking literally in front of their face, what's going on? Mr. Majid sets his knife and fork down, looks over at me, looks down, looks back at me. I'm thinking, maybe I should excuse myself and leave now. He looks up, stares for a moment, and then he says, please, that's so long ago. Can't you ask me a question about where we're going? He picks his knife and fork back up. Everybody at the table does. I dropped my head. And I thought, that's interesting. He did not tell me what I wanted to know, but he completely answered my question. If you want to grow against the odds, if you want to keep everybody focused, look to where you're going. Don't get distracted along the way. Guys, thank you very much. It's fantastic being with you today.